pair of hippies take an overly ambitious sailing trip across the Gulf of Mexico. They end up getting shipwrecked and find themselves in the tiny Central American nation of Belize. They stay, and in fact are welcome, and end up having a child in a small village of around 100 people near the Caribbean coast. This is the Hollywood pitch for Willow's origin story, and she's my guest in this episode, with a lot to tell about growing up in Belize with very unconventional parents and a very different life to what she would later experience in Australia. And even though she's lived in Australia now for many years, she's maintained an enduring connection with her country of birth, the smallest country in Central America and the only English-speaking one. And that, amongst many other things, make it a rather unique and fascinating country.
Well, my name's Willoh Wyland. So I was born in a little village called Samebite, which is in the beautiful country of Belize. And Samebite is on an 11-mile peninsula that is called, it used to be on the old maps, it's called the Placenta Peninsula.
Okay.
And right at the end is a little village called Placencia. So I was born there in 1980, and Samebite is a particular place because it is a Garifuna village, and Garifuna is a culture that is specific to the 4 or 5 places on the Central American coast, 2 being in Belize. And the Garifuna were a people who came from West Africa, and they kind of melded with the Arawak people, who were the original indigenous people of the Caribbean islands. And they came by boat from Honduras, and they landed at a few places along the coast, 2 being in Belize, 1 in Samebite, 1 in Sastoon. And yeah, Samebite at that point would have been like maybe 100 people. And my parents were actually living in Placencia, which is a Creole village, which is a distinct ethnic group in Belize. And the midwife, Miss Tilo, had just retired in her 70s after delivering many babies. And so she wouldn't deliver me. And so my mum went up the coast in a little skiff on a kitchen chair and had me with Miss Dora Williams, who was at that stage in her late 20s. And it was a source of great hilarity for the white baby to be born in the Garifuna village. And so Miss Dora, Miss Mardi, they call her, she's still there, so I visit her every time I'm there. So my parents immigrated to Belize. They were hippies. They met in New Orleans, and they fixed up a boat. And well, boat's a strong term. It was like a tiny lifeboat, and they sailed across the Gulf of Mexico.
Wow.
And my dad shipwrecked the boat, and they ended up in Belize because they didn't speak much Spanish, so they couldn't really have a baby in Mexico. And yeah, they literally had sort of nothing, and they ended up down in the south of Belize, living in this, at that stage, Belize is tiny. It's 350,000 people, not many more now, but at that stage, you could kind of meet anyone. So you could walk into George Price, the first Prime Minister after independence's office, literally. So they got given a house by this lady, Betty Zabanet, way down south. And Mum and Dad stayed down there till they were 7.5 months pregnant, until a skiff load of Placencian church ladies arrived to get them and were like, you can't stay down here and have a baby. Wow. So they were very naive, and it was a very remote place.
Yeah.
There was no car access or road access well into the 90s to where I grew up. They had me, and then they bought a yellow trimaran called the Southern Squeeze from a crazy German in the far south of Belize, and they fixed it up, and then we sailed. So we floated around. Belize has the second largest barrier reef in the world after Australia, which kind of rings the country almost from north to south. And in between the reef and the mainland, there's about 300 islands. And so, I mean, the boat didn't even have an engine. We literally were floating. And we lived a little bit in a village called Monkey River, which is south of Placencia, where my mum still lives at the moment. And yeah, it was, honestly, it was idyllic. It was, it was the early 80s. Belize had got its independence in 81. And, it's pretty, without being too romantic about it, I think Belize had a very different colonial history than the other Caribbean islands. It's the only Caribbean nation on the Central American mainland, but it didn't, and, the history of kind of colonisation there is particular as it is everywhere, but it did not have industrial scale sugar. It didn't have industrial scale enslavement. And so as a result, it kind of, the Spanish owned it, and then the British leased it from the Spanish to log mahogany. So there was these baymen, they call them, who were these, essentially like mahogany pirates who were bringing enslaved people. But because the population was so small, it was very mixed very early, which is where the Creole culture comes from and the Creole language, which is like quite similar to Jamaican patois. But it just didn't have this huge, this scale of horror, that was experienced in Jamaica and Trinidad and Barbados. As a result, there's a couple of things that the actual ownership over land is not owned by only the colonial remnants. But the national sort of psychology of multiculturalism was really a huge part of Belizean independence from very early on. So there's, really it's Mayan land. It was Mayan. It was the last place the ancient Maya lived. They moved there from like the Guatemalan highlands. So it's got this amazing Mayan culture. There's mestizo, which is like Spanish Creole mix. Then there's the Garifuna. Then there's the Creole, which is a big population. And then there's us little lucky white people who got to live there. But, it was the whole point of this story is it was very welcoming. Like when my parents were there, they were just, it was Belizean sort of hospitality and attitude to strangers was super, warm, and it was village life. There was like, no fences, no roads. We were just like running. There was no television until the mid-80s. I missed a lot. I missed pretty much the 80s and 90s.
So where were your parents from originally?
Well, I found out eventually that my dad was German, but he's like a, post-war horror story, but he actually ended up in the States and he was undocumented.
Okay.
And so him and the rest of the Wyland family. So, but he speaks great British English, so he could pass. He was dodging the draft.
Okay.
As well. And my mother is from Adelaide. So she's like, second gen black sheep. She's an artist, and she, lives between Kangaroo Island, which is also a remote island off the coast of South Australia, and Monkey River Village in Belize, which is a village of about 180 people. And she's there at the moment, like, painting murals with the school kids and doing weird watercolours.
But they basically, it sounds like they sort of ended up in Belize because of being shipwrecked.
They did, yeah. My dad is like a terrible sailor. He's always lived on boats. He's like not cut out for it, really, like bad-tempered, cocky, got a terrible relationship with risk. Like, my mum is a wonderful sailor. She's amazing. She's continued to sail safely all over the world. My dad still sails. He's had like 3 shipwrecks. Yeah, he sailed down through, at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, there's kind of a little gap between Cuba and the mainland where the Yucatan Peninsula comes out. And you've got this huge amount of current, because the Gulf is very deep, because it's where the meteor that killed the dinosaurs smacked into. So you've got all this depth, all these tiny openings between Florida and Cuba and then down there. So It's an insane thing to think you could do it. And my dad sailed too close to the coast and just got the whole boat smashed. So when Mum came back from Adelaide to tell her, like, sweet conservative Adelaide family that she was going to live in Central America with some crazy German hippie, she had like a bag of nappies and they just did it. They were, they lived super simply and they learned how to live from Belizeans. They grew food, they grew rice, they grew vegetables, they hunted for gibnut, they got super involved with the village and they were welcomed. Look, I think like lots of mum and dad split up and mum met this American woman, Tina, who had just arrived in Belize, who was from West Virginia, and they sort of got on the boat together and they sailed for years. There was allegedly homeschooling. Yeah, there was a bit of homeschooling. I eventually went to school in Placencia, in the village. I just took my daughter back there and put her in school for a year to the little Anglican school, which was awesome. It was history repeating. She was like the only little white girl in a school of 300 and she got, it was hilarious actually. She just came back to Hobart and the teacher just called me in and was like, Ek was like really concerned with how having her hair done. And it was just so funny to me because in Belize, of course, like it's a black culture, so you have to look good when you go to school. Like you're not slobbing around. Boys and girls, there's a real difference in the cultural approach to pride about appearance. But yeah, there was a bit of school. It was pretty ad hoc. I did eventually get sent to boarding school in Adelaide, which was pretty different.
And so how long did you live in Belize?
Well, we lived there proper till I was like 13. Well, sorry, that's not true. When I was 11, we came back and we lived on Kangaroo Island for a couple of years. And then when I was 13, 14, nearly 15, we moved back to Belize again. And then, I went to boarding school. After high school, I went and back and lived there for a year and I've gone back every kind of 5 years. It's expensive. Yeah. But, I just took my family back for like 16 months, which was wild. I always think it'll forget, I was so homesick. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure of what other people have said in the podcast, but it's a very peculiar sort of longing, loving two places, And I've realised after a while it's not really for anything sort of, there is all the culture bits in the family and whatever, but sometimes it's even more abstract than that. It's like, blue, I miss blue, or something, It's sort of quite hard thing to pin down, but I do, miss it.
So what was it like then having to, at a fairly young age, I guess, having to move quite a big distance from to live in Australia for a while again?
Maybe it's why I'm in Tasmania, because I was familiar with Kangaroo Island, which is not really Australia either. It's like the regional island places are also so strange and particular. Or we'd come and go to the desert. Like another thing my mum was into was like camel trips in the desert in far north Australia. So I didn't see the big cities. But I think my experience with boarding school, it was just hectic. I was just like transported from paradise, literal paradise, to this, Adelaide, which is just so snobby, and these like nasty little rich girls from rural areas with their fob chains and, R.M. William boots. But, I made some enduring friendships, and I always value getting to see into other worlds, like my grandparents left money for me to go to school. It was like, it's a privilege. And I got to get an education, which is, when going back to Belize, and lots of my friends who didn't get that opportunity, especially women, because of having kids early, is, real. So, yeah, I feel sort of, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I think I realise, especially coming back to Tasmania this time, I mean, Tasmania is also freaking white. Objectively, I mean, literally the amount of people, it's not to say there aren't amazing, complex migrant communities here, but there's a certain Protestant uptightness that really gets me down. I was like, we could be having a lot more fun. And Belizeans are really having a lot of fun with very little. They are enjoying being alive. They're aware that you take nothing with you. They are spending time with family. They're eating. They're, the general. So I miss that part of it. But, I work in the contemporary arts. So it's also not a lot of that happening in Placencia.
In some of the videos I watched about reasons not to live in Belize, connected a little bit to, I was reminded from something you said. It was one of the things was there's no malls here, there's none of that. And it seemed like one of the difficulties for people, say from America, to go to Belize is it's just not such a materialistic society that values those things. Would that be kind of fair?
Yeah, that's interesting. Definitely. I mean, Belize is it's a poor place. Not totally, but it is there is a small middle class, but, you will not see homelessness. Yeah. You will not, people look after each other. That's super interesting. They're also, Belizeans are incredibly patriotic, myself included. I don't want to hear anyone say anything bad about Belize, especially this one Guatemalan guy in Hobart. No. It's our border. No, but so, and they made some interesting choices. They won't let fast food restaurants be built in the country. Yeah. You can't build over a certain height in the city. They preserve the heritage buildings.
Yeah, right.
And stuff is hard to get. It's an island nation. It doesn't produce a lot. So everything is being imported. So where you are in Placencia on the coast, where lots of people, Americans, have moved to Belize because it speaks English. It's English. That's the major reason. And without being incredibly racist against America, but being very upset about the way that, capitalist culture moves into places and ignores, local wisdom, it's heartbreaking. It's like, they buy up beachfront. Belize has really a very big sense of civic responsibility. Belizeans are political, they're involved, they join their own community groups. They've done stuff like in Scotland, there's all these rites of passage kind of laws, you can't crown land along the beach. A Belizean can walk down any bit of the beach. So that's a huge source of conflict. There's also just people, honestly, it's grotesque the way that some Americans move to these places and just expect that really they are there because labour is cheaper, because stuff is cheaper.
Yeah.
And so, they treat people badly. Belize has never had the sort of tension that other places been. I've been to Barbados and Jamaica and other Caribbean places. It is intense because people are, Creole people in Belize are very good at communicating when they don't like you without saying anything. It's tense. And fair enough, right? That's really starting to bubble in Belize because there is so, they're experiencing the effects of climate change. They're struggling with the cost of living everywhere, and they're watching these people with so much come into these tiny villages. And you've got a local school that can barely sustain its teachers. And, it's those inequities are just very visible in a small place like that. If it wasn't so violent, it'd be funny, but it is. It's they are not participating at all in Belizean culture. And it's really sad because I think, Belize doesn't actually have the same tensions. But, there's also... there's more Belizeans in the US than there are in Belize. So there's a lot of you know, we need America. And I mean, like, we don't have to go into that, but yeah, what a time to be alive.
You were talking before about going to school in Adelaide. And at that time, did you imagine that you were going to be staying in Australia, or was there always going to be a kind of a return to Belize?
No, I've never imagined that I would stay in Australia.
Yeah.
You know, it's an interesting one, I think, you know, when you sort of become a third thing when your parents are not from a place, but you're from a place and you speak the language and you grow up there, you imprint on it. And that's, I think, an interesting experience as a, you know, in the great diaspora, psychology of the diaspora. I think, yeah, for me, I would love to go back to Belize. The huge barrier at the moment is educating my child, you know, if there was a height, and it's crazy for me to kind of put my finger up at that opportunity, because the reality is she won't get a good education if she stays in Placencia village. And if I have that opportunity, I should give it to her. And that's also the experience of the diaspora. It's like, don't spit in the face of God sort of thing is what, say in Belize, it's like, you know, it's not this sort of like, I've got wealth, I want to hide it. And it's like, whatever you have, use it. But yeah, I think that the place that you learn to love is like, you know, possesses you in a particular way, and you sort of, I've been away from Belize for big gaps of 10 years and more, but yeah, I think what I'd eventually like to do is just something useful there, and, you know, go and teach, or I want to get into disaster management, which is a growth industry everywhere in the world. So yeah, there's lots of ways to contribute, but it's also, you know, this time when I was there, I was sort of doing remote work back here, but I would prefer to be doing something local. And there's just, you know, there's an enormous amount of need there, and not just in terms of like what can we save, but just, you know, it's got no universities, you know, there's technical colleges, but there's not universities. So everyone has to leave to do that and come back. So like Tasmania with the Great Brain Drain, it benefits from people returning when they have something to contribute.
Going to school in Adelaide wasn't your choice so much, but what made you, I suppose, leave Belize more long term?
I think, well, there was a couple of things. I think being queer, there wasn't really a place for that in Belize. It's changed a bit now.
Yep.
But yeah, I made the awesome choice to bring my girlfriend back there when I was like 19, and that was a pretty intense experience. And I was like, oh.
And did you meet her in Australia?
Yes.
Okay.
I was like, let's go back to Belize. And it was just like, in retrospect, I was like, what the fuck were you thinking? I was so naive. So that definitely, you know, was intense for her. You know, nothing, the very real possibility of violence in that. And it's much harder, I think, for men. It's still much harder for gay men in Belize, all over the world. But I think that is really shifting. This time when I went back, it was, you know, as usual, women don't care. They're like, so that was nice to see. Like, there's definitely quite a few out people. There's, you know, it's still difficult, especially for men, but it's, I think, shifting slowly. And then I wanted to like make art.
Yeah.
And I think if I'd maybe gotten into film or whatever, it was just about being in a contemporary conversation. And so, yeah, that's really what made me stay. And then every like 5-10 years, I'd be like, I'm so homesick, I have to go back. And then I'd go back and be like, live there for 6 months and be like, I can't be here.
And so you wanted to make art. And how did that realise itself, I suppose?
Well, I spent 10 years making art with astrophysicists and space scientists. I've done a lot of like arty, nerdy stuff. I did make a work sort of with a fellow Australian who has Jamaican heritage, whose grandfather or great-grandfather came from Jamaica to Sydney in the 1800s. We made a radio play for botanical gardens, which we did in Hobart and in Sydney and Melbourne. So I've done a lot of stuff. I work as a curator. I used to work for Mona for years. But yeah, the lucrative but excellent choice, that's an opportunity you can have in Australia that you can't in Belize. So that's interesting to think about when I go back there, is all these little baby artists. There's always one.
Yeah. But how did you get into that field?
Just being really bloody minded. I don't know. I think, obviously being raised by two renegades, I sort of didn't ever consider that you weren't allowed to do stuff. You could just be a pirate. So that's been helpful in being an artist. I just sort of figure it out, talk to people, have that attitude. But also I think there was a bit of a golden era. There was a lot of support here for being an artist when I was in my 20s. I started stuff that then became funded or turned into organisations, and I think I've had that combo of luck and tenacity.
And how did you end up in Tasmania?
I got drunk with an ex and they convinced...
How every good story starts.
And I sort of had my daughter and I was wanted to not be in the city. And I'd come down here.
So where were you at the time?
I was in Melbourne, And I made a show with this woman down here, Lucy Wilson, who was obsessed with those manholes, manholes.
Yeah.
We made a show on Collins Street where she came out of one of those. Okay. I don't know how we got permission to do that. Anyway, I don't know, and maybe it was, sort of starting to happen down, I think the festival, Monofoma Festival had just started, and I don't know, there was a bit of a vibe, and I moved down, and then I started working with the festival, doing their nighttime programming. And
by the festival, you mean
Monofoma, when it was, back in, it was so wonderful. It was I was very tired, and this is of the conversation in the arts in the big cities as well. It just felt very boring and circular and a bit, I think when you grow up between cultures, the whole high art, low art bullshit just seems so dumb. In what about fun? What about, but I love Tasmania.
Yeah, well, you're obviously still here.
Yeah, I love it. It's so weird and gothic and intense, but it's...
And when you first came, did you think you were going to stay longer, or was it just short-term?
I think I did. I was I don't want to be anywhere else in Australia. I think because, I don't know, I like the feeling of dedicating yourself to a place. It's definitely something that Belize has taught me, is you need to be part of it to contribute to not necessarily change it or to understand that, and you have to have a long-term relationship with places. And I think, I always get this, it's this sort of idea that, obviously our colonial history, the Palawa history here is so complicated, and how we are in Australia as the inheritors of this place is to me, I want to be somewhere for a long time to sort of be part of something. I think if you move around a lot, that sort of longer term thinking is harder, I think. I love the light, the Tasmanian.
And so what did you feel that Tasmania had that you didn't get in, say, Melbourne or other cities you lived in?
I think, it's sort of obviously then being inside of nature in a different way. I felt very claustrophobic in Melbourne. But I think Belize is full of pirates, and so is Tasmania. It's it's literally everyone falls off the mainland and ends up in this kind of, there's just that, like that person, there's so many eccentrics, there's so many marvellous weirdos.
I was going to say, there literally used to be a guy who'd walk around dressed as a pirate around the city.
Exactly. Like, I love that. I like things to be weird and gnarly, and, you know, I think it's one of the great parts of Australia is this sort of like cowboy bandity sort of feeling, and I get a lot out of that, you know. And I like being in small places also because you've always got this cross section, you know. You're at a party here and there's like some old rave dude dancing with like, then, you know, the nurses from the Royal Hobart and it's just a mix. It's a mix. It doesn't become as bubbly and as cliquey, I think. Yeah. And I like that.
What would be kind of some of the bigger things that are maybe similar, and what are some of the significant differences, I guess, especially in the like cultural aspects?
It's pretty different. I think similarities, you know, there is that sort of small place thinking, I think. Mm-hmm. It can be quite paranoid, big small places. Belize feels very surrounded by the Latino culture, which it is. And that is manifested in the border dispute with Guatemala. It's Belize's, by the way. So that, I think, has a particular sort of insularness. Belize is mostly, I mean, people want to come home and they don't want to go anywhere. That's like the vibe in Belize. Mm-hmm. So I think that small town, like, it does do something to you. You know, it reminds me of the sort of attitude of Tasmania, Charlie, you're from the big island and you'll never be from here, sort of. Yeah, the main, you know, differences, I think people keep to themselves here a bit. People they don't sort of get involved in your business. That's not the same in Belize. In Belize, everyone gets involved in everyone's business all the time. So that's quite, it can, you know, there's a very different sense of loneliness in different places. Mm-hmm. And, yeah, Tasmania can be a sort of quite a lonely place, but that's also can be quite refreshing, you know, to get to have your silence. It's not something you can get in Belize. It is like, and there's a real expectation about how you are with your friends and family. Like, it's not, you're not getting out of, you're doing stuff with them all the time. And it's not really optional. It's not like, I don't really feel like that brunch, Margaret. That's not a thing. You are doing it, you've got a role. And that's relaxing as well. And the social aspect is like, they're awkward in really different ways. Like, in a place where, like Belize, where people expect to know each other their whole lives, you don't have to do small talk because you know that eventually you will figure out the stuff about that person. It's just not sort of part of it. So you could be like years without someone asking you what you do and that's also relaxing. It also can be weird for us, for white people, because it's so much, what you do is so much part of how we feel valued and whatever.
Certainly.
It's totally irrelevant.
Certainly in Australia.
Certainly in Australia.
And so how long have you sort of been in Tasmania now?
Overall?
Yeah.
I've been here for 7 years. Been here for 7 years, yeah. And I've just been back for like 3 weeks from Belize. So I'm in the holy shit mode.
Okay. What's it been like going back to Belize? Have you noticed the changes from having sort of gaps in being there?
Yeah, there's a lot of, you know, people die. The life expectancy is really different. It's like 65. So that's the saddest bit always, is like, you know, my mum's generation of people, she's in her early 70s. She does so many you know, there's huge problems with diabetes. There's huge,
Right.
so there's significantly worse health outcomes in Belize. The medical infrastructure is terrible. You know, it's not terrible as in it's terrible for if you've got complex issues, diabetes, heart disease, all of that. Actually, the general medical is kind of good. So that's devastating, actually, to, you know, you feel that in a place like that. All my parents' friends pretty much are dead.
Yeah.
You know, and my step family. So it's like the impact of the expats, even the fact they call themselves expats, not immigrants, is so telling. It's like the built environment that they create is horrific, and also just does so much to literally show you the gap in wealth when you've got a tiny one-person shack with a huge family in it next door to a McMansion that's been built on the beach that's eroding. So there's that. And then, the corals bleaching, there's the livelihoods and the dependence. Belize made an incredible pivot in the late 80s. They brought back all their ownership. They nationalised their ownership over their marine parks. They created these huge amounts of national parks and marine park. They put the control back into Belizeans' hands. They made it easy to become guides. They shifted their economy into ecotourism, and now it's, you know, in a lot more sustainable way than, like, it's really cool. You know, they didn't sell it out. They got control back. And now that is just like on the precipice. So, but, you know, lots of good news stories as well.
Because you said your daughter went to school in Belize for a bit.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, they're out, they're doing community service, they're doing marine education, they're volunteering, they're like just in the normal school curriculum. There's this huge emphasis on participation, and it's awesome. And yeah, it's a real counter to the whole, like, you're perfect, you're amazing, everyone can be president, here, have a phone, you know. Be neurotic.
So was it a tough transition then coming back to Tasmania?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I love it here. I love my friends, and I've got family here now, but it's actually just the built environment. It's just colour. That's what I realise I hugely miss about Belize. I'm such like, and the snacks, like the focus on food as a daily part of, you know, it's very bougie here, foodie, you know. Yep. Food is sort of just this, there's a lot of talk about food in Belize. It's just part of it. I miss that. I miss the actual sort of colour of the place and the smell, and there's all these sort of intangible things.
Yeah.
I feel that it's a bit bleak. We could just paint a few buildings fuchsia, you know? It's not hard.
What are you doing now in Hobart, I guess?
What are you doing now? Well, I'm looking for a job. That's a boring answer. But yeah, I'm continuing to make my weird art. My daughter's going to school. Yeah, I have a studio in the city. I'm kind of, you know, I'm here for a while because of schooling. So I'm just, you know, thinking about how I can contribute to the place. And, you know, I think art in Tasmania it's in a hard place as it is nationally. It's really, people are really hurting in terms of artists being able to make work. And so, yeah, I'm kind of thinking about that next bit.
And what field of art are you in?
I do a lot of different things. At the moment, I make my own interdisciplinary projects, which often involve video and film and performance. I used to be a curator at Mona or a creative director, but at the moment I'm writing a lot. So I'm writing a commission for a company in Melbourne called All the Queen's Men. That's like a festival show called Cake that is about a queer performance artist in Australia who discovers he has a doppelganger in Utah who is an anti-gay activist Mormon. True story.
Interesting.
That's why I've just been in Utah for 3 weeks in researching Mormonism. So I'm working on that, and I've got another commission for a company from Tasmania, Archipelago, and that's also for performance. But yeah, I think, Tasmania is a great place to work and write and make art. It's not a great place to, I used to work more in performance and things of scale. That's more difficult here. So I'm kind of thinking about my next time.